aid and peace-building initiatives and work with the Nigerian government to eliminate terrorist criminal groups, securing a safer and more stable future for all Nigerians. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Who's next? Mr. Fine. Chair recognizes Mr. Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to participate today.
You know, as I thought about what I would talk about today, I thought of a flag that I saw flown on October 7th, 2023. It said, "First we come for the Saturday people. Tomorrow we come for the Sunday people." And as we have this hearing today, I ask myself, how many countries are we going to allow this to happen in until we take it seriously? On October 7th, 2023, people yelling Allahu Akbar attempted to genocide the Jews. A few months ago, people yelling Allahu Akbar attempted to genocide the Druze in Syria. And here we are talking today about another group of people yelling Allahu Akbar trying to genocide Christians. How many countries are we going to have this happen to? How often are we going to allow this to be whitewashed and both siderists until we acknowledge that we have a serious problem that we have out there? You know, I want to thank President Trump for doing this. Joe Biden never should have done it. And my question when I get to it will be, why do you think he did? Why do you think he took them off the list? But I want to thank President Trump for taking a leadership role, because we must stomp out this evil wherever it presents itself. I want to thank the chairman for choosing to have a hearing on this. And I want to thank my colleague, my fellow freshman, Representative Moore, for also raising the profile of this issue around the world. It is easy for me to criticize this when it happens in Israel and when it happens with the Jews, given who I am. But it is important that we call out evil wherever it is. And I am sick and tired of the fetishism and the whitewashing of the problem. This is a real problem that we have to acknowledge. In a country where you can get the death penalty for criticizing a religion. We'll talk about that if I have time to get to questions. That is not okay. That is not acceptable. That is not a value that America should ever stand by and allow. We are allowed to have whatever opinions we want in this country, no matter how reprehensible they may be. We should demand that from others if they wish for our aid and assistance. But what I'm most tired of is the delusional belief that if we all just sit down around some sort of hypothetical drum circle, as I heard earlier, that we can resolve our differences. People are being killed, and it requires people to stand up and use force to keep them and to make them safe. I'd like to ask the ambassador, since 2009, it's believed 19,000 Christian churches have been destroyed. My question to you is, was that a coincidence? Were they just like randomly targeting buildings, and these 19,000 buildings happened to be churches, or were they targeted because they were churches?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. As my colleague has said, and the Trump administration strongly believes that there has been a disproportionate number of attacks on Christian communities, which is the reason for the designation.
Okay, and so let me follow up with this. Why do you think Joe Biden decided, given this was going on, we're all good, we're taking this away, everything's going to be fine now? What led to this delusional strategy that led to the deaths of Christian people?
I can't speak to that decision.
What do you think?
I would say that there was probably a discussion around strategic interests, but the performance did not achieve the result intended, which is why this administration has made a decision that we need to see more performance in this area in terms of security for all Nigerians, but especially to tackle this particular problem.
Okay. I'd like to ask Mr. McGee a question. What is the administration's position, and how strongly have you encouraged the Nigerian government as it relates to blasphemy laws? You know, this idea, you talked about problems that people are having there. They go to jail for years because of their words. because of their criticism. Not saying I agree with their criticism all the time, but all they're doing is they're not threatening anyone, they're not killing anyone, but somehow they go to jail for blasphemy, something unfortunately many people moving to this country want to impose on us here. What has the administration done to say to that, that's not okay, we're not going to abide by that?
So it is unacceptable in a free and democratic society to have blasphemy laws, period. They are not only imposing on somebody's free speech, but they're also imposing on their right to practice their own religion freely. And when blasphemy laws are used as a tool by the mob, or bandits, whatever you want to call them, to attack Christians, it shows that blasphemy laws are a problem per se. It's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons why the Trump administration opposes these laws, and it's one of the reasons why Nigeria is on the CPC list, because these Sharia laws are being used as a bludgeon against Christians oftentimes.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here, and I will close by thanking President Trump for being willing to go after Muslim terror wherever it rears its ugly head around the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fine. Dr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having this hearing. Africa is an area of particular concern to myself, a person who's been deployed there a couple times on Marine Expeditionary Units, seen some horrible things. It was interesting to me when one of the caucuses here in this august House claimed that President Bush waited too long to go into a certain country to secure the capital of Liberia after a presidential exile because he didn't give a damn about Africans. Meanwhile, we stood by during the Clinton administration in '94 when I was in Entebbe, Uganda, waiting to go into Rwanda, while about 1 million people were killed in very similar fashion to what's happening right now. People are being hacked to death with machetes. I've seen some very graphic things on what's going on right now. People literally being dismembered by machetes. People digging their own graves and literally being just summarily executed. And yet the right thing to do is to continue with the diplomacy that's resulted in this all along to take them off the CPC. And this idea that this ever went away is ridiculous. We're right now considering selling to arms them one of the most advanced attack helicopters, the AH-1 Whiskey, the Viper, or it's a Zulu. I'm very concerned with how that's going to be deployed and against whom. We've seen the integration of very, very radical people inside of the government agencies themselves. And we've seen this in Afghanistan. When I was in Afghanistan, we saw the same thing, where the bad actors actually get inside of the government agencies and turn upon their own people. Very concerning. We saw Tigran Gambaryan, one of my constituents, taken hostage by the Nigerian government and held hostage for several months because of some business dispute they had with somebody in America. Bad acting on the Nigerian government's behalf. Now, you talked about, I'm going to quote you on high-level things, Mr. McGee, high-level meetings, what the next step would be, a lot more. But I'm asking for specifics at this point because I've never seen generalities ever result in anything that's been of consequence. What can we do on the by an international community, whether it be from the transnation in Africa or through the international community, through the UN, which I've seen be highly ineffective in the past, but what can we do of quantity and quality that's actually going to make a difference in Africa, because we haven't been doing it? What specifically, not generalities? Can you give me those answers between the two of you?
Sir, just a clarification, please. Across all of Africa or specifically in
Specifically in Nigeria, but all of Africa can actually contribute to solving this problem. We can use several countries to help us out with this. We don't have to be the only force to be.
Development and commercial investment in the continent can yield the best dividends, which is one of the reasons why this administration has focused so heavily on our commercial strategy in Africa. We rewrote the strategy and we've focused very heavily on delivering U.S. companies to the continent because we believe that they offer the best in terms of quality and can bring the most development. And it also delivers for the United States. We've focused very heavily on security, and AFRICOM has engaged heavily across the continent, so security is very important. law enforcement is a very important piece of that as well. And so I'd say, as you look across the continent, the number one priority that I would place, because it lifts all boats, is the economic piece, and I'd focus on commercial.
So the AFRICOM commander is a Marine, four-star, good friend of mine, and I understand what his limitations have been. You know, obviously, we don't want to be, if you're not invited into a country, it makes it much more difficult. I've seen the leverage we have economically, but I'm worried also about pushing them into Chinese arms, which they're ready and waiting to pilfer that country and its resources. What about how we deal with the international community coming in there and stabilizing it in a military fashion so that we can actually stop the violence? Because it doesn't seem like the government's being effective in that at all.
The new AFRICOM commander, General Anderson, it's good to hear that he's a colleague of yours, is highly capable, as you know, Special Forces. He's brought a lot of focus to the continent and how he would like to work with African governments, including Nigeria, on sharing information and on achieving better outcomes on the security side of the equation. And so he's been very, very engaged, and I believe will achieve results in terms of security on the continent.
Okay. I'm just going to once again get back to the center point that wasn't really addressed, but I hope is addressed. Yes, we need that financial leverage on them, and I think they will pay attention to that. We have their attention, but it's not finishing the race. We need to bring the international community on board to solve this in very tangible assets, because the violence is real, it's not stopping, and Nigeria does not seem to be taking this seriously. Thank you. With that, I yield.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCormick. Mr. Oshatsky.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member Jacobs, and to all our witnesses. Ambassador Pratt, thank you for your many years of service to our country. I'll just open by saying I am a man of deep faith. Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. I have no problem sharing that. I am also troubled by the state of religious freedom in Nigeria and around the world. So I want to be clear up front, violence against Christians in Nigeria is a serious issue. Christians are being massacred and communities are living in constant fear. But this suffering is not just confined to one religious group. Masad Boulos, President Trump's own senior advisor for Africa, recently said, quote, "People are suffering from all sorts of backgrounds. This is not specifically targeted at one group or other. Terrorism has no color and no religion and no tribe." President Trump's own senior advisor. Muslims and Christians alike have lived under the constant threat of extremist groups like Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa for far too long. And so the real story here for me is not about Nigeria's intent at the institutional level to persecute people based on faith. Instead, it's really an issue of capacity. The Nigerian government lacks the means to protect communities against groups that kill indiscriminately. To be clear, this does not abdicate the Nigerian government from responsibility. A government's duty is to protect its people, and when there's a failure to do so, whether that's neglect or corruption or governance, leaders must be held accountable. But capacity within Nigerian institutions maintain peace is a real question, and we should be asking what the U.S. is doing to help Nigeria build that capacity. Are we offering real partnerships or just threatening airstrikes and sanctions? Or instead, are we thinking about technical support, training, and investment in the institutions that prevent violence in the first place? So let's work together to fix what is broken, and I appreciate the ranking member for opening up this hearing with additional support options, and I want to thank, again, the chairman for convening this. On the issue of capacity, Ambassador Pratt, you've said that Nigeria needs to do more. If they don't have the capacity to do more, we should help with that. And so I want to know, I guess my question there is, does the State Department assess that the Nigerian government has the capacity to protect Christians and other religious groups from extremist violence?
Nigeria is a very wealthy country, very populous country. We believe that this is a question of focus. There is a security problem in Nigeria, a very serious one, that we are trying to help the country address. And we have brought tools to the table in terms of U.S. programs and assistance. In particular, on the issue we're discussing today, we would like to see more focus on that particular issue, in addition to addressing the larger security question that you referred to.
Okay, I look forward to working with you on that. One other issue that's important to me is youth and youth development. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom's 2025 annual report recommended broad support for Nigerian civil society organizations. The U.S. has historically done that. A State Department funded program in northeast Nigeria called Nigerian Youth Care brought together Christian and Muslim youth leaders to promote dialogue between those two communities. These programs divided Nigerian youth with mentorship and training on how to bridge religious divides. Unfortunately, that program was disrupted for months because of stop work orders, and the State Department did not grant the implementer an extension of the project at the end of the fiscal year. To either the ambassador or Mr. McGee, can you explain why this project did not receive a no-cost extension at the end of the year? And would you recommend to the Secretary to reinstitute this program to reduce violence and promote that interfaith dialogue?
Thank you for your question, Representative. As I said earlier, the United States is by far the most generous country with our foreign aid, and we plan to still be the most generous country with our foreign aid, as Secretary Rubio has said. So some programming you mentioned, we actually have ongoing programming in my bureau that leads to early warning, early response systems that also includes dialogue between religious communities. As many members have stated, this is a complex problem. It's not one that can be addressed with one neat solution. There are, of course, like every human action, multiple drivers of this persecution, and there are multiple communities being affected, not just Christians, as you mentioned. Yeah. But we must tell the truth. That begins an honest relationship with Nigerians is to tell them that a lot of this violence is driven by religion, religious persecution, religious extremist ideology. And so in terms of programming, we're committed to the programming that we have on the ground that is effective. It's saving lives, and we are reviewing every foreign assistance dollar at the State Department to make sure that taxpayer dollars are used effectively and actually helps people on the ground.
That's great. I thank you both for your time and your testimony today. I look forward to following up on those programs with you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
I'd like to now recognize Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Smith, for convening this hearing. And I just want to recognize real quick the tremendous impact that Chairman Smith has had in this realm of human rights, Christian persecution over the decades. I'm a former staff member, actually, of this committee. I worked on this committee when Chairman Smith was on this committee. He had a very large impact on me as a staff member, and to come full circle back around and be on a hearing on such an issue that was really inspired by Chairman Smith's work here when I was a staff member. Thank you for that. And but I think one of the things that's, and I would say disheartening in this, hearing some of the media reporting and frankly some of my colleagues on the other side of the dais here, is this misdirection of what is happening. There is a persecution of Christians in Nigeria. The witnesses have made that clear. We heard the bishop speak. I don't know how many times we have to hear it or how many reports of murdered, martyred Christians, my brothers and sisters in Christ in Nigeria, how many times we have to hear that happen to take it seriously. And one of the things that concerns me is that it feels like at times it's echoing an indifference around this, and somehow we're going to develop our way out of it through developmental programs, and this indifference sounds like echoes of Rwanda to me, where we did nothing on that. And I think, as you remember quite clearly, President Clinton has stated that as one of his largest failures in his administration. President Trump has made a definitive decision to actively engage and stop the killing in Nigeria, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. You all have used a word that I think is very apt in this, and this is prioritization. And as Chairman Smith put it perfectly in his opening statement of this hearing when he spoke with the senior officials of the Nigerian government, is that we do want to work with them. We have the opportunity here. I think the Nigerians have an opportunity to deepen and strengthen their relationship with the United States if they will prioritize the protection of these communities. Of course, non-Christians are being killed too. We're not saying that's not happening, but there is a systematic, targeted campaign that's happening here. I met with that same delegation, same as Chairman Smith did, and some of the feedback we were getting is a little bit of that same misdirection. But let's not turn a blind eye to what's happening. Let's not believe our lying eyes, right? One thing I'd want to point out here is we've had religious organizations and advocacy groups have been calling for humanitarian assistance in the Middle Belt region. And my understanding is that the Tinubu administration has not specifically requested it. That's why it's not there. They just have to ask for it, and our State Department will then provide that assistance to those organizations on the ground. That is a perfect example of prioritization and indifference to what is happening here. So that would be a great, to use your department's term, confidence building measure on the part of the Tinubu government in this, if they are serious about this. Because I can promise you President Trump is. He is very serious about this. A question that I have for you is, the Nigerian Constitution prohibits the ownership of firearms. But somehow, these Fulani militants operating in the Middle Belt of region of the country, they're all armed. And we're not talking about ISIS, we're not talking about Boko Haram. Why hasn't there been some type of move or campaign by the Nigerian government to disarm these militants that are operating there, where we're seeing a lot of this killing that is coming from them? They have access to AK-47s and other small arms to slaughter Christians. Is this something that you've been talking to the Nigerian government about? Because I think it would actually have a serious impact, and it is something that I raised with the Nigerian government officials when we met with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Moore, and thank you also for your service on this task force that will be providing recommendations in your meetings with the Nigerian officials. Appreciate that. I think that this is an excellent suggestion as part of the strategy that we are putting together, in particular to talk about the policing aspect of this and what is happening in the Middle Belt, so that we can focus resources and have specific recommendations on actions that the Nigerian government can take. I very much appreciate that suggestion.
Yeah, it just seems to make all the sense in the world to me. It's like, here we are. I mean, I understand we're not going to get like ISIS to lay their arms down. That's probably more of a kinetic option there that's going to result in their arms no longer being brought up in anger against Christians. But in any event, this seems to be something that, obviously, I'm not saying it's easy, but it is something that they should be doing, they should be looking at. And while I got just a couple seconds left, I would urge the Nigerian government to take a look at pardoning Sunday Jackson, who is an individual who was fighting for his own life, defending his life against one of these Fulani militants. That Fulani militant lost his life in that struggle, and now that person, Sunday Jackson, is facing the death penalty. Now, where's the justice in that? Where is the justice in that? And all these Fulani militants are breaking the law. They are breaking Nigerian law. And so this Sunday Jackson disarms this person with a knife, protects his own life. He's going to prison and now faces the death penalty. And Fulani militants just roaming bands of them with AK-47s, and that's no problem. You are so right about this question of prioritization. I know I'm over time, Mr. Chairman, but I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moore, for your leadership, and do appreciate it very much. Mr. Stutzman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership on not only this issue, but so many other issues related to life and to religious freedom. I want to thank the ranking chairman as well, and appreciate the witnesses for being here. You know, before I begin, I just think it's really important to recognize that what is happening in Nigeria, it's not unique. And that's why religious freedom really matters. It's the core foundation of our Constitution. I mean, I would argue that you can't have economic freedom if you don't have religious freedom. I've been doing some work with the new administration and the changes that are happening in the Middle East and Syria. And, Syria is a very diverse country, and it's so critical for them to have religious freedom and respect. It goes both ways. And I think it's really important, and I think could have a huge impact if Christians and Muslims and Jews and, name all of the religions, if we would all stand together and condemn violence, condemn this sort of violence that's happening in Nigeria, condemn the violence that's happening in Soweto, in Syria, against the Druze and against the Christians and against those that, would push back. I appreciate President Trump, who I believe is the strongest diplomat, he's the strongest negotiator, and especially when it comes to religious freedom. He's been willing to call it out around the world. And so we have this opportunity as Americans to really push the importance of respecting religious freedom and it really being part of the fabric of every country. It's also important for us here at home. I mean, not only is religious freedom important around the world, but it's really important for us here at home. I mean, the last thing we want to see is threats to religious liberty in the United States. We need to be the example, and rather than just looking at others. I mean, we have, of course, a very strong, diverse nation as well. One of the things I want to ask and get to is we talked a lot about the tools that the administration has. Senator Cruz and I introduced legislation that would redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. And again, of course, very disappointed to see that was revoked during the Biden administration and the steps back that has caused there. I want to ask, Daniel Ada is from Benin. He's as a candidate for president. I just visited with him. He's a friend of mine. I was asking him, since Benin is right next door to Nigeria, what are we seeing in the surrounding areas? Are we seeing some of the same attacks and atrocities in other countries? And is there any sort of coalition? I know the Nigerian government is acting like this isn't happening, but is there any sort of coalition being led by us or within the region to fight back and to push back? I appreciate Mr. Moore's comments about disarming the jihadists and those who are attacking, but is there any discussion about arming the innocent as well, as in making sure that they have the ability to defend themselves with their local law enforcement and is local law enforcement working for them? So a couple of questions in there, but I'd be happy to hear from either one of you.
Thank you, Representative. The security problems, very, very serious ones that exist across the littoral states of Africa are common and are shared, especially in the north, as we see more and more terrorist insurgent action. And so this is a shared problem. We at the State Department, but especially the Department of War and AFRICOM, have focused very heavily on sharing intelligence and trying to create the type of cooperation that you referred to between those countries, so that they're sharing information, using best practices, sharing intelligence with each other to be more effective. In terms of the particular problem that we are discussing today, this targeted attacks against Christians, it is most acute in the middle belt of Nigeria.
One of the things that we know in the Middle East is looking at the curriculums that are taught in schools, and especially some of the curriculum that we saw that was being taught in Gaza to the young children about killing a Jewish soldier is something worthy of. I mean, do we see this sort of education system at all in these countries? Because what are the young people learning? Are they learning to be pursuing peace and prosperity? Or are they also being taught anywhere in these schools some sort of jihadist activity is worthy of accomplishing?
refer to my colleague from DRL as well, since they publish reports on this that cover some of these issues.
Sure. So you'll see in our human rights reports where we call out human rights violations across countries around the world. In terms of Nigeria's curriculum in particular, I don't have that information right in front of me, but we're happy to report back to you on the committee.
Sure. No, that's fine. I appreciate you both, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing.
Thank you for your questions and comments. We are joined by the former chairman of the Africa Subcommittee, who is now over at the Energy and Commerce Committee, John James, and I want to thank him. February of 2024, he had a very important hearing on Nigeria and other advocacy throughout that time. So the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your personal invitation, for your leadership, and for your friendship. I'm honored to be back. Psalms 96:14 asks, "Who will rise up for me against the wicked? Who will take a stand for me against evildoers?" Nigeria is facing one of the gravest religious freedom crises in the world. As the former chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Africa, I have visited and have seen firsthand the direness of the conditions in what is now the deadliest place on earth to be a Christian. They are targeted, displaced, and killed simply for their faith. The ancient plea, "Is there no help for the widow's son?" still echoes today. Since 2019, nearly 17,000 Christians have been killed. In the first 7 months of this year alone, hundreds more were murdered. On June 13th, during the Yellowwater massacre, more than 280 Christians were slaughtered in a single day. These are not isolated tragedies, but a sustained pattern of religiously motivated violence, often ignored or even enabled by the Nigerian government. Extremist groups like Boko Haram, Fulani militants, and ISIS West Africa attack often without any meaningful intervention from authorities. The lack of response has created an atmosphere of impunity where Christians continue to live in constant threat and fear. The United States has previously recognized this crisis. President Trump not only designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern during his first term, but redesignated it again in his second term after President Biden inexplicably removed that designation. Religious persecution is tied to political repression and weakening institutions in Nigeria. Example, the detention of Nnamdi Kanu is a clear example. In 2022, Nigeria's Court of Appeal struck down the charges against him and ordered his release. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has also called for his unconditional release. Yet he remains in solitary confinement, in deteriorating health, and recently had to represent himself in court. Nigeria has signaled that the law is optional and targeting Christians is fair game. Just hours ago this morning, despite the pleas and cries of the Nigerian people and many Nigerian lawmakers, Nnamdi Kanu was convicted on all charges. For fiscal year 2025, the U.S. has requested nearly $8 billion for sub-Saharan Africa. But when Americans see political prisoners, judicial defiance, and the slaughter of Christians, they understandably ask as they meet their own struggles, why should our tax dollars support governments that refuse to protect their own people? Is our aid aiding a genocide? Nigeria is a nation of tremendous potential, but that potential is being choked out by violent persecution of its Christian population. No country can build a stable future where churches are burned, believers are killed, and communities live in fear. The United States must stay engaged, and Nigeria must change course now. Mr. Pratt, a direct question. Do you believe, in your professional assessment, that the government of Nigeria has been infiltrated by jihadists?
I do not believe that the government of Nigeria has been infiltrated by jihadists.
Okay, because when you look at the selective enforcement of the rule of law, one might question if there are any favoritism or looking the other way when groups are being specifically targeted, despite the fact, as my colleague Mr. Moore mentioned, not enforcing the rule of law with regard to weapons. My next question, how has the Nigerian government reacted since President Trump's country of particular concern designation announcement?
They have taken the designation very seriously. There is a senior delegation here now. They will meet with the most senior officials of the U.S. government this week. And we have already demarched the government in Abuja and here in Washington on the action plan. And I can say that the results so far have been positive in terms of cooperation.
The Nigerian government needs to do more to address this issue themselves, but what measures are being taken to assist Nigeria to increase its focus on persecution, particularly in the Middle Belt?
Yes, so thank you for your question, Congressman James. As you mentioned, the Middle Belt is a particular concern. That's where Christians, you mentioned the Yalwada, where 250 or 280 Christians were killed, massacred. They were targeted because they were Christians. Churches have been burned there. There have been internally displaced people there. And so we're reviewing all options at the State Department, including Chairman Smith, you mentioned our bureau. We have global Magnitsky Act sanctions. We have other tools at our disposal as well to make sure that Nigeria, the Nigerian government gets the message that we are serious about the persecution of Christians and other communities as well, but particularly Christians right now who are suffering disproportionately in the Middle Belt.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me again. God bless you, and good luck. I'm here for you.
Thank you so very much, Chairman James, and thank you again for your great service. I'd like to, between the ranking member and I, we're both going to ask one more question and then go to our next panel. I would like to yield mine to my good friend, Mr. Huzenga, who asked a very serious question about the IDPs in Benue, and if there's any answer that you wanted to give and the tyranny of the clock precluded that, please feel free to do so, and then I'll yield to my friend and colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you yielding to me, and I think you saw my passion on this earlier, but there are serious issues, and part of that interview from Arise TV, one of the other questions to me was, well, doesn't the CPC damage Nigeria economically in a way that is going to disincentivize economic growth and foreign companies coming into the country? And my answer to them was actually, I think the current state of violence is as much a deterrent of a foreign company or a U.S. company coming into Nigeria. And I know the goal of the CPC is to correct behavior, but could you explain a little bit exactly what you would expect to see out of a CPC and what sort of changes it might bring? And then I want to address the 1.4 million who are considered the internally displaced people, IDPs, in Benue, and what the game plan would be to provide the IDPs in Benue and Taraba, what sort of assistance they can depend on from the U.S.
Thank you very much, Representative. This CPC designation, we hope, will focus the energy of the government of Nigeria, as well as our own government here, on all of the tools that we have available. And so by setting up this task force that I referred to and looking at all of the types of assistance that we can bring to bear, but more importantly, what the government of Nigeria can do to own this problem and improve security for all Nigerians, but in particular, tackle this problem that we're talking about.
But they have to admit there's a problem first, right? Okay, and I think that's been one of my concerns is I have not seen an actual admission to this being a problem. It's been given excuses and veneers of a lot of other issues that get parroted both here and in the media. Can you talk about the displaced persons and the help that they could be expecting?
On displaced persons, we do have programs that address this, and we want to make that part of the action plan that we are working on. My colleague from DRL may want to provide more in particular on IDPs.
Sure. As Ambassador Pratt just mentioned, the State Department is reviewing options to help IDPs. You mentioned what actions we want to see from the Nigerian government. That includes, as we've mentioned here several times, prosecutions of perpetrators. Amen. That includes reduce violence in the Middle Belt. And that includes
Against all.
against
right?
all. Exactly.
Christians, moderate Muslims, anybody who is not being targeted, right?
Exactly right. So the Trump administration stands firmly for the principle that religious freedom is for all religious communities and those who don't practice a faith. It is a per se good, and we're committed to helping protect communities all around the world who are experiencing religious persecution, not just in Nigeria, not just Christians. At the end of the day, we want the number to be 0 in Nigeria. We don't want any religious persecution to happen. We don't want it to just be a reduction in violence. We want there to be 0 people who are murdered because of their faith.
Amen to that. Corruption continues to undermine Nigeria's institutions, including those tasked with protecting civilians sometimes. I've heard from some of these instances and conversations I've had with religious leaders in Nigeria who don't feel that the Nigerian government is equipped to respond to the crisis. How does corruption within the security forces hinder the government's ability to prevent and respond effectively to religiously motivated violence?
Corruption is a major problem globally and in Africa and in Nigeria. I think that it erodes capability, right? It erodes the confidence of the forces, especially at the working level. If they see that their superiors are engaged in corruption, that totally undermines the whole enterprise.
And I assume that that is part of State Department's and this administration's action plan that they want to see out of the Nigerian government.
Absolutely.
The Tinubu government is a crackdown on corruption.
To be more effective, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Time has expired. I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you. I yield to Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Jacobs, for yielding. I think this has actually been a good discussion on this committee and an important one around what strategy we use to eliminate violence against any community. And I think the issue for me is that if you define the problem as people being attacked only because of their religion, that would lead you to one set of solutions. If you define the problem as people being attacked for other reasons, it would lead you to a different set of conclusions and strategies. And I think, Ambassador Pratt, I resonated when you said we have lots of tools in the toolbox. One of those tools is just around the kind of assistance we give to efforts that are cross-faith, interfaith, cross-cultural, building the kinds of ties that we need to build, because I think this is not a religious oppression Olympics. We're not trying to say one religion is worse oppressed than another. We're saying, how do we get to that ending point that we all agree on, that there shouldn't be violence against any of these communities? And so I guess I want to ask you about programming that specifically promotes interfaith or cross-cultural dialogue. The foreign assistance review that was conducted earlier this year actually this administration cut many of those types of programs, and there are suggestions that there's going to be even more cuts that focus on these kinds of programs. One of the ones I was looking at very carefully that I know is Nigerian Youth Care, and that's one that provided Nigerian youth with mentorship and training on how to bridge religious and cultural divides. Given the administration's concerns about religious conflict and some of the shared goals we've articulated, can you explain why that contract was canceled?
Thank you for your question, Representative. So there is ongoing programming in Nigeria that addresses some of the issues that you've raised. Our early warning, early response programs, for instance, also have kind of an interfaith dialogue built into them. We've seen great success from people who have experienced the program, saying that they have increased, they've seen greater tolerance amongst their communities, et cetera, et cetera. So we have effective programming. Broadly, in terms of foreign assistance, the Trump administration is reviewing every foreign assistance dollar, not to cut, but to make it more effective. We've reprioritized, we've reshaped foreign assistance in a way, not to eliminate foreign assistance, but to make it more strategic. The United States has been the most generous partner around the world of any country for foreign assistance. Secretary Rubio has said we will continue to be the most generous country. So I'm happy to share some of the programming and success we've seen and get back to you on those answers.
I would appreciate that. And if you can look into this one in particular, and I might send you a few others, because I think that if you say that you're only going to focus on a particular kind of program and you say some of these things are not effective, you know, my work overseas in all of these countries says that some of this work takes time to develop the kind of leadership that is not going to be divided down the road. And so it may not have the same metrics of success immediately that you see, but I think many of these programs really do prove to be extremely important in the long term. And so I just would like to know, you know, what is the status of each of those U.S.-funded programs related to religious tolerance? If you could share a list of that with me, I would really appreciate it. And what new assistance programs should we expect that the administration, maybe you can speak to this part, that the administration is going to promote? That's the second part of the question. And then the third part of the question for you is, I am concerned about some of the reports I'm hearing that certain programs are just going to be cut because they focus on particular communities, or they, you know, are framed in a way that somehow is part of a you know, some sham DEI initiative. And so maybe you could speak to those last two and get me the list of the first one.
Sure. So I'm happy to follow up with the committee on specific program we have across Africa. The administration is committed to using its foreign assistance effectively and strategically, and gets the most bang for its buck for American taxpayers, because ultimately we're responsible to the American taxpayers. So in terms of programming, I'm happy to get you the specific answers that you're looking for. In terms of the other questions you raised about specific communities being having greater assistance, I forget how you phrased it, more targeted programs. We want religious freedom for all communities, full stop. We don't want religious freedom for some communities. We want religious freedom for all religious communities, including those who don't practice faith. We think it's a violation of a moral law that somebody is killed because of their faith. We see that happening in all parts of the world, and the Trump administration is committed to helping countries take ownership of their own issues and actually go after people who persecute Christians and Muslims and people of all faiths, and actually shift the responsibility to where we want to help partner with these countries, but at the end of the day, the countries themselves have an obligation to protect religious freedom in their countries. And
I agree with you on what you said. I just would say I'd like to see the data that backs up what you're saying, and why certain programs that seem very much in line with what you're saying are being canceled. So I appreciate your attention to this, and we'll follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member.
Thank you. Thank you both for your testimonies, but above all for your leadership. It's extraordinary. And so thank you, and we'll move on to our second panel. Thank you. I'd like to now welcome to the witness table. And we will show a very short video that was just taped yesterday from Mrs. Akpen, I should say, a survivor of the Yellowwater massacre. She lost 5 of her children, and it's just one example of the incredible heartbreak of being slaughtered because she's a Christian, because her family was a Christian. And that'll be showing in 1 second. But if our witnesses could come to the table. You can put the video up. Okay. We'll come back to the video in a minute. Let me introduce our distinguished witnesses, beginning with Nina Shea, a senior fellow and director at the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Ms. Shea has been a human rights lawyer for over 30 years. She works extensively for the advancement of individual religious freedom and other human rights in U.S. foreign policy as it confronts an ascendant Islamic extremism that we're seeing in Nigeria, for example. And I want to thank her for her leadership. She has testified before, and her wisdom has been greatly esteemed by this committee, and particularly by this chairman. We'll then hear from Oge Bugu, is that correct? Thank you. Who is director and senior fellow of the Africa program and CSIS and a foreign policy leader with 2 decades of experience shaping policy and engagement on Africa and U.S.-Africa relations. Most recently, she served as director of the Africa program at the Wilson Center, where she led research and programs that centered African knowledge and agency in developing actionable strategies to address critical issues facing Africa and the U.S. Relations. I would like to yield now such time as she may consume, and then to you as well, to our witnesses. Nina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Jacobs and members of the committee for holding this very important hearing. The debate about CPC designation for Nigeria began in earnest in Washington last spring after you, Mr. Chairman, had introduced a resolution that urged CPC designation for Nigeria, as you had previously done in 22, and when this subcommittee held a pivotal hearing on the case for Nigeria CPC designation last March. Thankfully, President Trump listened, and he made his decision based on 2 criteria. One, under the International Religious Freedom Act, that these were severe violations of religious freedom, and that the government of Nigeria, President Tinubu, was either actively engaged or tolerating these violations. Those are the criteria of the IRF Act. So Nigeria's multifaceted terror problem that has had a devastating impact on both Muslims and Christians alike is well known, but the long overlooked persecution of Nigeria's Middle Belt Christians by Fulani jihadi militias finally got Washington's attention when that March hearing was held, and Bishop Nnamdi testified. The bishop gave startling firsthand testimony that described frequent raids on farmlands of his Makurdi diocese by armed Fulani Muslim herders who kill, rape, or kidnap residents, all the while shouting the jihadi battle cry, Allahu Akbar. Bishop Nnamdi, who testified today as well, and I'm honored to be part of this hearing with him, related that 20 parishes in his diocese have been shut down because of these attacks. Moreover, he said, Nigeria's government was doing nothing to stop this. I agreed in my testimony then that Nigeria should be designated a CPC precisely because the relentless and systematic Fulani attacks targeting Middle Belt Christians are carried out with complete government impunity. By contrast, the government is fighting the terror groups in the north. So this is really key to understanding why CPC is warranted in this case. The bishop's frank testimony required heroic courage. He soon began receiving death threats. A few weeks later, Fulani militants attacked his home village and massacred 12 of his relatives and scores of others. The priest directing his Justice and Peace Office, who took the body counts and came to the aid of survivors in such attacks, has been forced to take temporary leave after credible threats to his life. Mr. Chairman and White House, Mr. Chairman, you and White House officials who had met with Bishop Nnamdi were appalled when you heard of this. The attack was part of the brutal pattern seen in hard-hit Benue and various other Middle Belt states, but it also raised the concern that this attack was in reprisal for his testimony to Congress, one organized not simply by nomadic herders, but by those in Nigeria who are close observers of Washington. 2 weeks after that incident, Yelawada, which is, by the way, only 5 miles from the state capital of Makurdi, that's Benue State, was hit by a large Fulani raid. Others have spoken about that. Over 270 Christians were murdered, and the victims included some who had been displaced from their hometowns by prior Fulani raids and had sought refuge in Yelawada because there's a military garrison there. The Nigerian troops there did not put up a fight against the dozens of, and it was only dozens, of Fulani attackers who swarmed in on motorcycles and some on foot, wielding assault rifles and machetes as their weapons. This has been going on for years, again with government impunity. Similar attacks are taking place elsewhere in the Middle Belt. To give one recent example, Catholic priest Father George Dogo told the outlet Truth Nigeria, which is directed by former State Department official Douglas Burton, that 10 days ago in Taraba, Fulani militants stormed through a local government area, indiscriminately killing 20 people and burning and damaging homes and churches. A survivor, Christiana Joseph, a 33-year-old farmer from Amadu village, told Truth Nigeria that as she was preparing to go to early morning mass, a Fulani militia arrived on motorcycles and shot into her house. She is quoted stating, "They fired for about 5 minutes, shouting Allahu Akbar. When the gunfire stopped, I went inside and found my husband of 14 years, John Joseph, already dead." Survivor Samson Haruna also stated that attackers on motorcycles with AK assault rifles strafed houses in his neighboring village. He said, "My neighbors, David Bawa and Titus Gregory, lost 5 family members between them. My house was riddled with bullets." According to the Truth Nigeria report on this Taraba attack, quote, "The Fulani militants that attacked were led by warlord Al-Haji, an abandoned resort now overgrown with vegetation called Damjuma Farm, that the Fulani use as a cover for cattle grazing," he said. That's the head of this security agency. "But that's just a smokescreen." And he commented that if the government wants to stop the attacks, they must clear out the terrorists from Danjuma farms. In a Daily Post Nigeria article, Reverend John Lekel, the Director of Social Communications for the Wakuri Diocese, that's the same diocese that I've been talking about, described the situation as devastating, revealing that many rural parishes have been abandoned following sustained assaults that have claimed multiple lives and destroyed entire villages. Bishop Nzukwen told the respected ACI Africa outlet last year that, quote, "If peace is restored, the region's rich agricultural landscape could provide a prosperous future for its residents. Instead," he said, "there is food scarcity because of these constant attacks." And there are countless reports like this across the Middle Belt. I mention this one because it shows that Abuja has failed to act even when the Fulani aggressors are identified and their base from which they launch repeated attacks are known. This represents not only a horrifying pattern of severe persecution by Fulanis targeting largely Christian areas, but also a shocking pattern of government tolerance of this persecution. I want to give one last example from Plateau State that occurred a month ago. The Reverend Ezekiel Dechomo of Plateau, who's the regional chairman of the Church of Christ in Nations, told journalists in Jos on October 24 that Islamic extremists have threatened to murder him from calling on the Nigerian and U.S. governments to help protect Christians against genocide. He told the Christian outlet Morning Star News, quote, "My life is in grave danger. Even as I speak, I am on the lookout for attacks. I no longer sleep with my eyes closed. I have been attacked before but escaped. The threats came after he appeared in a video on October 15, standing in a mass grave containing the remains of a dozen slain church members, reportedly killed by Fulani herders. And Mr. Chairman, there have been hundreds of priests and pastors killed in the last 15 years, targeted, not as the State Department reports that they were walking alone or unguarded on a road at night, but they've been attacked and killed in their rectories, homes, and inside their churches. As the Nigerian government issues denials and watches passively with no Fulanis prosecuted and no Nigerian forces prepared to defend the vulnerable, the Christian death toll from Fulani militia attacks alone, leaving aside the terror attacks from Boko Haram and ISWAP and the others, is in the thousands, and Christian survivors in displacement camps number in the millions. The respected research group Open Doors cites Nigeria as now the world's most dangerous country for Christians because of their religion. Again, at this time, most Nigerian Christians are being murdered by Fulani militias, and they are the militia's special target. Aid to the Church in Need reported last month, quote, and this is a Pontifical Foundation that says this, Nigerian Christians in the Middle Belt are bearing the brunt of violent attacks from those identified as Fulani militants. Some insist that the violent aggression by the Fulani herders against the Christian farmers on their own land is the unavoidable result of climate change. The State Department Religious Freedom Reports have annually described these indiscriminate mass killings as clashes between two socioeconomic groups who fight over scarce resources brought on by climate change. Religion has nothing to do with it, they claim. This justification of Fulani violence has recently shifted. Now it is generally acknowledged that Christians are being murdered in cold blood, but it is being argued that more Muslims are killed in the violence, and this proves it has nothing to do with religion, they say. This argument is not factual, and it is irrelevant for CPC. The premise that more Muslims than Christians are killed is debatable, as the scholarly Observatory for Religious Freedom in Africa documents. In any case, most Nigerian Muslims live in the north, where Boko Haram and a plethora of ISIS and Al-Qaeda-linked Islamic terrorist groups attack them and non-Muslims alike, and this violence, too, is religiously based. However, significant for CPC criteria, the Nigerian military is actively fighting those terror groups in the north. By contrast, in the Middle Belt, where most of the Christians are being killed in recent years, and where Christians are the special target of Fulani herder militias, the government isn't lifting a finger against the Fulani militants. Instead, it is tolerating them and denying it is happening. I've also heard about sporadic Christian attacks on Muslim villages. To the extent that the government is not taking action in those cases, that is further reason for CPC designation. Political momentum to list Nigeria among the world's worst persecutors gained throughout October as the annual CPC review neared the year-end deadline, and reports of massacres kept coming. On October 21, the Pontifical Foundation, Aid to the Church in Need, issued its world survey that reported, quote, the number and ferocity of the attacks on Christian villages in the Middle Belt have led some experts to conclude that these incursions are a deliberate land grab to remove Christians and Islamize the region, end quote. Various high-level White House officials in the State Department were also hearing from groups of religious freedom activists on Nigeria. Later that week, President Trump made the CPC designation. For the first time, the issue of Fulani militias targeting Christians for mass murder received official U.S. acknowledgement when Secretary Rubio addressed this. This in turn got the attention of Nigeria's President Tinubu, who said he is willing to work with the U.S. Until now, he has not shown the political will to stop this Fulani violence. CPC, as you know, is a two-step process. The next step in this process requires the President to adopt a policy response. And we heard today from the State Department about what is being considered. And there are several actions that I also endorse. One is to, it's been raised before by Representative Moore, and it's my first recommendation, disarm Fulani herders. These militias are loosely organized. They don't have explosives or drones, don't use tunnels, suicide vests, or propaganda films. They are an unsophisticated, but nevertheless lethal force because they come armed with AK-47s and 49s, while their targets have only homemade pipe bombs to defend, pipe guns to defend themselves with. Assault rifles, such as those used by the Fulanis, are heavily regulated by Nigeria's Firearms Act and illegal for the targeted Christian farming villages. The act specifically only allows homemade what are called Dane guns, cap guns, and another muzzle-loading guns. The act thus outlaws the firearms that would match the assault rifle firepower of Fulani militias and leaves the peaceful Christian communities essentially defenseless. President Tinubu should order the removal of Fulani heavy weapons, raiding their encampments at Dan Juma Farm in Taraba and other places in the process. He should direct the powerful cattle breeders associations, such as the Mayeti Allah Cattle Breeders Association, to cooperate in doing this. Two, fortifying targeted areas. So U.S. foreign aid in Nigeria in recent years has amounted to about $1 billion annually. Areas targeted by these Fulani militias should receive some of this aid to securely return home and reclaim their properties, rebuild, and defend themselves. For example, this aid could go toward intelligence sharing, the training and equipping of local private security guards, as well as other measures. Again, the Fulani militias are not the formidable foes seen in ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and their attacks could be prevented relatively easily, prevented and defended against by these basic measures. Humanitarian aid is important, and this should be for the victims of Fulani herder militia attacks, and this should be distributed through trusted local providers, including through the churches on the ground that are currently one of the main aid providers to the survivors of these attacks. And it's just, again, tragic and ironic that productive farmers now need food aid since they have been driven from their Middle Belt farms. 4, sanctions against those aiding, abetting, and granting impunity to the Fulani herding militias, including those sanctions should include high-level officials in the criminal justice system and the military. The U.S. should gather intelligence regarding official responses to the Fulani herder militias and review possible visa and Magnitsky sanctions for those aiding and abetting. The Fulani warlords' names are known or knowable. Out of all the, I think it's important to understand that out of all the violent attacks by Fulani herder militias, there have been only a few arrests. One involved the prosecution of a Fulani herder who was convicted of destroying melons at a melon company who received a 10-year sentence. It shows the government can get tough when it wants to. And 2 high-profile legal cases of violent attacks on Christians have seen movement in recent months. One concerns the Catholic Church of St. Francis in Ondo, where terrorists killed some 40 worshipers on Pentecost Sunday in 2022. Depositions are being taken in that case. Ondo's bishop recently told me, but the trial has not yet started. It's important to note that's not in the Middle Belt, it's in the South. The 5 suspects being held are said to be part of the East African Shabab terror group and are not members of the Fulani herder militia. The other case involves the Yelawada massacre itself, where charges are have been filed against 5 Fulani herders in September, in an extremely rare example of prosecution that I believe is attributable to the pressure raised by the CPC debate in Washington. Finally, the International Religious Freedom Act suggests as a possible policy response to CPC designation a binding agreement with the country to prevent further violence. So I think that is something that should be considered as well. and unfortunately, President Tinubu hasn't shown the political will so far to direct the police and military action within his power. And he argues that because the police force is centralized under the Constitution, he is overwhelmed. He says that a constitutional amendment is required to give back policing power to the governors of the state, and that could take years. However, right now there exist legal ways he can shore up defenses within the targeted Christian areas. For example, decentralizing police commands internally, or empowering local guards, or deploying more mobile police units to states, and prioritizing referrals of state governor police orders for presidential review. So I suggest that the U.S. enter into a binding agreement with Nigeria to ensure this needed police protection against the Fulani militias. Since President Trump's CPC designation, I know some Nigerian officials, including generals of a force in the southern state of Ondo, who cite worries about securing Nigeria's wide open border, already asked for U.S. partnership in an effort to help, to quote, help flush out Fulani ethnic militia terrorists from the Southwest. Thank you.
Ms. Sheikh, thank you so very much for that very well thought out testimony. I mean, you have so much in there, and I'll go back and read it to pull out much of what you have just conveyed to the committee. So thank you for that. And I'd like now to recognize our next witness, Ms. Anabugu.
Thank you very much. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Jacobs, distinguished members of the committee, I'm honored to share my views before this committee today. Just want to state that CSIS does not take policy positions, so the views represented in this testimony are my own and not those of my employer. In this testimony, I would like to reinforce the recommendations that I made before this committee in March. In addition, I would like to reflect on how this tenuous moment in U.S.-Nigeria relations provide an opportunity for both countries to work together to address the critical threats of jihadist violence and insecurity in Nigeria, and to develop a more strategic partnership. The United States and Nigeria have a complicated bilateral relationship with shared interest in counterterrorism and economic development. But this relationship is often marked by periods of friction. Nigeria wields significant continental and regional influence, but grapples with violent extremism and internal security. Nigeria's leadership in West Africa is crucial, and its ability to address its governance and security challenges will impact not only its future, but the wider region. Nigeria's instability stems from a key shortcoming. Despite 64 years of independence, it has yet to establish a national identity grounded in basic freedoms and dignity. Currently, ethnicity, religion, and language, rather than nationality, define the identity of its diverse population. Understanding the violence in Nigeria requires looking beyond its apparent religious and ethnic motivations. For me, growing up in Jos Plateau State, I've witnessed the impacts of these ongoing conflicts on vibrant communities. In addition, coming from a family involved in Christian missionary work, I recognize the shared faith between Christian communities in Nigeria's Middle Belt and those in the US, rooted in the history of American missionary efforts. However, a narrow narrative that reduces Nigeria's security situation to a single story and frames it solely as the persecution of Christians oversimplifies the issue. Religious and ethnic violence is driven more by governance failures and is worsened by hate speech and conspiracy theories rather than being just a singular conflict. Nigeria is facing multiple security crises due to religious extremism, banditry, criminality, resource competition, communal disputes, and separatist agitation. These issues are intertwined with history, poverty, and political contestation. The interplay between religion and politics in Nigeria is deep and complex. Leaders often romanticize the country's unity, but fail to foster it, as we saw in the divisive 2023 elections. As Nigeria approaches another national election in 2027, religion will once again continue to influence candidate selection, voter behavior, and campaign strategies. The Trump administration's claims that Nigeria is permitting targeted killings of Christians distracts from the broader issue of extremist violence and insecurity in the country. Since returning to civilian rule in 1999, Nigeria has been a major recipient of U.S. security assistance, primarily aimed at counterterrorism. Despite this significant assistance, the extremist threat in Nigeria has worsened, expanding from the northeast, where Boko Haram has waged a 15-year insurgency, to the northwest, where so-called bandits are raiding villages. Most victims in both of these regions are Muslims. Since Boko Haram's emergence in 2009, Nigerian administrations, including the administration of President Tinubu, have struggled to improve security. And many Nigerians across the country acknowledge that the situation has only worsened in recent years. Therefore, narratives focusing solely on the killing of Christians often overlook Nigeria's broader insecurity and the fact that religion is usually a secondary factor in the violence. Recent violence in the Middle Belt predominantly affects Christian farming communities from various ethnic groups. Victims are mostly believed to be killed by Fulani herders who are primarily Muslims. But the killings aren't explicitly motivated by religious reasons. While some community members actually describe the violence in their communities as genocidal, they often emphasize that the underlying causes are ethnic and material, such as land grabs, rather than on religious differences alone. Nevertheless, the high level of insecurity across Nigeria has left many religious communities, including Christians, at risk. The failure to hold the perpetrators of these violent acts accountable has created both a sense of impunity among the attackers and a sense of grievance in the affected communities. Nigerian citizens have mixed reactions to the U.S. redesignation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern. Many, particular Christian groups, welcome the attention, seeing it as a chance to push the Nigerian government to act against the violence. However, there are also concerns among many Nigerians, including Christians, that President Trump's threats of military action could also exacerbate existing political tensions. Public opinion surveys overall in Nigeria indicate a public consensus on the seriousness of the security challenges in the country, with many Nigerians valuing their diverse communities and believing in shared national unity over divisions. Now allow me to offer some concrete recommendations. First, to the United States government. It's important to engage deeply and broadly with communities across Nigeria. The U.S. can play a constructive role, but it must avoid selective intervention and address the concerns of all Nigerians across all religions to prevent worsening sectarian divisions. Two, it's important to rethink reactive quick-win actions that may seem beneficial to Nigerians, but could have larger and far-reaching negative impacts. If the Trump administration proceeds proceeds with unilateral military action in Nigeria, it could endanger the Christians it aims to protect and worsens divisions along religious lines. Third, prioritize security governance to help tackle the violence. The U.S. should reassess its security cooperation with Nigeria, focusing on building a program that prioritizes security governance and ties military support to tangible reforms. This renewed partnership should extend beyond military aid to include intelligence sharing, rule of law, and governance. 4, support local actors that are advancing inclusive peace and conflict resolution. Supporting moderate religious leaders and community networks in developing early warning systems can shift the focus from identity-based conflict to sustainable solutions. 5, work more with Nigeria's state and its growing city centers. The U.S. government should decentralize its engagement with Nigeria by strengthening dialogue and support for receptive leaders at state and local levels, particularly in the Middle Belt, which is home to about 45 million people. The focus should be on local security to foster a safe environment for agriculture and manufacturing. This approach should integrate economic development with sustainable peace by addressing root causes of the conflict through economic revitalization, institutional reform, and business initiatives. Finally, for the U.S. government, it is important to revive the U.S. Congressional Bipartisan Caucus on Nigeria. The U.S. relationship with Nigeria is a key strategic partnership in Africa. An active bipartisan congressional caucus will highlight this importance, foster discussions, and provide a platform for diverse perspectives to better inform legislative responses on various issues. Now, recommendations for the Nigerian government. It is important to appoint a Nigerian ambassador to the United States to improve its international engagement and manage narratives about its security realities. It's critical for President Tinubu to appoint a capable Nigerian ambassador to the US, as I also recommended in my testimony in March. Second, the Nigerian government needs to make accountability of both perpetrators and of the authorities central to the response. Nigerian citizens need justice, as criminality in the Middle Belt has increased due to impunity. The narrative of Christian genocide has gained traction because of years of mass killings without accountability, leaving many faith communities feeling abandoned. Third, Nigerian government needs to get serious about police reform. Nigeria's single federalized police force struggles to address the country's complex security challenges. The Tinubu administration needs to accelerate initiatives to improve citizen security, including the recruitment of 30,000 new police personnel he approved in June. The military in Nigeria is overextended. Many of them are handling duties that should be handled by the police. And it's essential to think about how the country reassigns police officers that are currently providing personal security to wealthy elites to focus more on the serious crimes. Next, coordinate federal and state action and messaging. Effective coordination so desperately needed among Nigeria's federal and state governments is often undermined by finger pointing, and this must stop. Finally, for the Nigerian government, it's important to start laying the groundwork for peaceful elections in 2027. Nigeria must address the use of religion as a trigger for electoral violence. The new leadership in its election commission presents a chance to restore public trust in the electoral system, promote responsible political behavior, and strengthen security and judicial processes. The violence in Nigeria has resulted in significant loss of life. However, addressing the country's complex security issues solely in religious terms and focusing on one group of victims is counterproductive. A fresh approach is needed both for Nigeria and the United States. Nigeria must tackle its institutional weaknesses in security, justice, and conflict prevention to effectively end the violence and hold perpetrators accountable. The U.S. should engage in open dialogue and cooperation, fostering a better understanding of Nigeria's complexities. Both countries can leverage current diplomatic tensions to strengthen their bilateral relationship and collaboratively address the wider threats of jihadist violence in Nigeria and the surrounding West Africa and Sahel region, as both nations have vital interests at stake. Thank you again for inviting me to testify, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you so very much for your testimony. We do have a video I'd like to show. This is of Mrs. Akpen, a survivor of the Yalwada massacre. She lost 5 of her children. The baby in her hands is her one remaining child, but she and so many others who were slaughtered that day, her family. We hear from them, we hear from her, the priest in the picture, that the horror is, the PTSD from that is just unthinkable. And so I just want to, it's a very short but very powerful video.
Good afternoon, good evening. It depends on where you're watching us from. I am Reverend Father Philip Apple, the coordinator of the Foundation for Justice, Development and Peace, FJDP, of the Catholic Diocese of Makurdi, Benue State, here in Nigeria. I am here with one of the survivors of the Yelwata massacre of 13th of June 2025 here in Nigeria, where we lost over 200 lives in a single night. So she is here to be witness as one of the survivors of that grave attack. So we'll listen to her. That her name is Nsoshima Akpen. That when they went into sleep that fateful night, around 9 p.m., the Fulani terrorists attacked them where they were sleeping. That they were locked inside the camp at Yelwata, and they were butchering them with cutlasses and shooting guns as well. When they thought all had finished at some point in time, they poured petrol on the building, and most of them, majority of them, were set ablaze. That in the course of this action, she saw a tree up when she lifted up her eyes, and she raised her hands, head on the tree, climbed up where she was able to hit herself. That her 5 children that she left below were crying, and in her presence, they were being slaughtered by the terrorists.
Okay.
That she ran out into the bush at some point, and those who came for rescue would now bring her out of that place at some point, and she was able to witness the whole drama. And when the people came, they were now relocated to a new camp. So thank you very much. This is the much we can receive from Nsoshima Akpen. God bless you.
Thank you very much. And we now go to questions. Let me just ask On one of my trips to Nigeria, I did visit the Fusion Center, which there was a great deal of cooperation beginning, and I mentioned that our ambassador, Mike Waltz, to the United Nations was actually deployed there as a Green Beret and a part of a special forces training component. There was a great hesitancy on the part of our government to engage that to the degree that would really make a difference. And I'll tell you what they told me. They said that they were worried about the applying the Leahy law so that we do not fund or train human rights violators. So believing that, I actually asked, I had a hearing, and Ed Royce did a hearing on the full committee, and we asked the Undersecretary of State under the Obama administration how many Nigerians could be trained. And she said, matter of factly, half. We don't need half, but a large number, half would be, that could be trained in counterinsurgency. They wanted night vision goggles, they wanted intel to track down Boko Haram and these other then emerging groups, ISIS West Africa, for example, and it never really materialized the way it could have. Now, one of the hopes I have, and I hope many of us have, coming out of this, will be that there will be a renewed effort to, again, support human rights trained people, men and women who are not accused. Certainly, that is a very difficult thing to prove one way or the other. The Leahy law is very hard to implement. And I sat through an actual session with a Foreign Service officer in Abuja as he went through names, and just to get a sense of how robust the effort is. Very, very hard to do. But again, so many can be trained. And I think what we are hoping will come out of this, in addition to a whole lot of other things, is a very highly trained counterinsurgency force that will take it to Boko Haram, the Fulani terrorists, and others. I note that just today, there's a report that just came out that the president is not going to a G20 meeting, and he's deploying additional people to a place where there were killings in Kawara. And I hope they're realizing we're not kidding in the United States. The President of the United States is absolutely committed to this. Marco Rubio is as well, and right on down. And what are we doing? We want to help, as I said earlier, those who are at risk, those who are dying, those like that wonderful woman we just saw a moment ago who lost 5 of her children. We don't want that to happen anymore. And, you know, I do believe that the art of the possible, when you have a will, when you have a focus, you can have great achievements for peace. And that's the hope here. So last night, and I know that my colleagues also had meetings with this high-level delegation, and ours went for almost 2 hours. And I said, think of us as partners. You know, yes, we do have the ability to levy sanctions, and you may not like it, but we're doing it because we care about the people in your country that are being slaughtered, both Christians and Muslims. So your thoughts on really getting this cooperation off the ground? When I was there, I talked to a lot of people, and I followed up once I got here, and they had all these recommendations. Only a few, if any, were ever carried forward with, and that's unfortunate. Some were, but I think a top-to-bottom review of what can be done, what does it take, and then meanwhile, on the humanitarian side, and we asked this last night, and Mr. Huizenga asked this as well of our 2 witnesses from the administration. You know, the government really needs to do more for its IDPs. It has not. But we want to be helpful there too, making sure that food, medicine, shelter is available to them. So the IDP camps that I've been in were awful. One was an old hotel that was just, makeshift turned into an IDP, and that was probably one of the better ones. So your thoughts on that, on really helping Nigeria to help themselves?
Well, I think that that is important. That's the way to get this, to tackle this problem. once and for all. I think that President Trump has instilled at least some political will on behalf of the government to, within the government of Nigeria, to take some action. And it's absolutely essential to do this, both because religious freedom is a pillar of U.S. foreign policy. It's in compliance with the International Religious Freedom Act, which requires the president to review every foreign country to decide whether or not to designate it as a CPC, and that annually, and the year is ending, so it was appropriate that President Trump do that again. It's going to help alleviate just unfathomable human suffering, as we've seen in that mother's eyes today, to halt Nigeria's descent into failed state status or and avert possible civil war, and to not to deepen the spread of terror across West Africa. It's absolutely essential that Nigeria's government start engaging in the security of its own people. And again, there has been some willingness, political will, to fight the terror groups in the north, but there hasn't been any prosecution so far, successful prosecution of any one from the Fulani militias at all. So I think that that's...
Just say that again for emphasis. There has not been, with the Fulani militias, efforts to... So there hasn't been, and then that is, I think, more of a police work, and warfare is very different now. There's human intelligence is getting rarer and rarer. There's drone intelligence and other forms of technological methods. But I think that it's actually a relatively easy problem to solve, relatively. And it should start with that, and simultaneously actually work on the and help locate Leah Sharibu. You mentioned in the Chibok schoolgirls that are still enslaved. You mentioned, Mr. Chairman, that there was intelligence sharing in the past, but nothing happened. I think that was a prime case of that, and that should be pursued. And can be pursued again fairly easily with modern technology, and it should happen across the country, including in the north. There should be cooperation and work on the terror groups and sealing the border and sharing our experience with that. President Trump's been very good with that. And we have a lot to impart, and if the government of Nigeria is willing, I think it would benefit all of us and the region.
Thank you very much. I think, consecutive U.S. administrations have defined or described the relationship with Nigeria as one of its most important on the continent. And even though that relationship has been complicated with, periods of friction, I think this moment that we find ourselves in seems as if all things have aligned. And there is an opportunity now for both the U.S. and Nigeria to come to the table to reset that relationship, especially given the fact that citizens across the board in Nigeria, every data point you look at, there's overwhelming acknowledgement that the levels of insecurity in the country are unacceptable. I think the fact that we have this coming from Nigerian citizens provides the opportunity to have real serious conversation based on concrete benchmarks for progress. The mistake that would be made is if it is seen as being a selective intervention favoring one group over the other. So there is an opportunity for Nigeria and the US to reset its relationship, one that would really be based on listening to the Nigerian people. And Nigerians are saying levels of insecurity are very high. How do we address it? So this opportunity now provides leverage to the US, working with the Nigerian government to actually show some very clear progress.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would point out, and this is worth noting, because I was always perplexed with Secretary Blinken, and I asked him at hearings just like this, why he withdrew CPC, and I never got a good answer. But when we were doing the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, I held all the hearings, most of them in this room. And John Shattuck, who was the Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, testified against it for the Clinton administration. On the record, I have all the records, you can go look at it. He said it would create a hierarchy of human rights, which is nonsense. And I even, in my response to him at one of the hearings, was to say, okay, I was all for combating apartheid, which was not a very popular thing within my party in the very beginning of the Reagan administration, and I was all for it. Did that take away any other human rights work we were doing? It was not in lieu of, it was in addition to what we were doing in any other area of human rights work. And I said the same thing about religious freedom. It is a pillar of our Constitution. It's a pillar of our, it's really a universally recognized human right. But they said it was that 1 year later, I had a hearing on, did it do that? And I had the Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom testify, because they were all saying, Shattuck especially, it would make everything worse on religious freedom. And the word back was, even after 1 year, it was seriously advancing religious freedom. Ditto on trafficking. I was told by Harold Coe, the Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, right from where we're sitting right now, that most of what was in my Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 would be counterproductive. We don't need a tip office. We don't need all of the dozens of new programs that were unleashed by that law. And it was a bipartisan law. Sam Gajenson, who sat right here with me, it was my bill, but he was our principal co-sponsor, and we really worked together to get it passed. And he was from Connecticut. And again, as we went over year and year after that, it was like, yeah, it really did help. But it was stopped in its tracks had we listened to that argument. Blinken was a part of that on the religious freedom back then. And I always felt, I could be wrong, that there was a sense that the Religious Freedom Act was not something he was terribly enamored of. So it was very easy to get rid of the CPC status for him, because he did not give a good answer when asked directly by me, and I wasn't the only one, where you sit, Nina, why? What's the why of it? And at one point he told the appropriators that there's none of this has anything to do with religious freedom, you know, in terms of the violence. Really, it just doesn't pass a straight face test. So that's, in my humble opinion, one of the reasons why we had such, again, and I remind everybody, it was Clinton who signed the International Religious Freedom Act. And we didn't know if he was going to do it. At the very end, we did have veto-proof majorities to overcome a veto. But that said, he did sign it, and I'm forever grateful for that. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Nnamdi, thank you for testifying again before the committee today. As you know, President Trump, in his November 1st Truth Social post on Nigeria, threatened to deploy the U.S. military guns a-blazing into Nigeria to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists there, stating that if we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet. All of those are quotes. Do you believe unilateral U.S. military strikes in Nigeria would make the situation more or less safe for Nigerian citizens?
I believe it will make it less safe.
Can you elaborate on why?
Because all the data points show us that Nigerians value diverse societies. But even as they value diverse societies, there are also experiences where overwhelmingly there are low levels of trust. Already, just from the threats that have been made, we're already seeing, especially if you go on social media, people basically forming camps and basically coming up with different conspiracy theories about what is feeding the threats that have been made by the president. So I think it's important to understand the complexities of Nigeria and understand how fragile things are in the environment, and that for years you've actually had members of the political class that have actually manipulated that public mistrust to gain power. So at this point, you hear people forming different camps, and making different statements and building different conspiracy theories. I think overwhelmingly Nigerians value unity, and the conversations that are happening now are not good for Nigeria's social cohesion.
Thank you. And I do want to dig a little bit more into that because it's not just the actual military strikes that would cause problems, but we've actually already seen that even just these threats and rhetoric have had immediate consequences. I've personally heard anecdotes of this happening already in Nigeria. You mentioned it in your opening statement that this was a risk. Could you expand on this and explain how inflammatory rhetoric can make tensions within communities even worse and actually lead to the very violence and targeting that this administration says it's trying to counter?
So as I mentioned, because of the low levels of trust that we see in communities, all we have to do is date back to several conflicts that have occurred over time in different parts of Nigeria. And we've seen how some of them have been driven by conspiracy theories or hearsays. And in many ways, rhetoric like this could actually be detrimental because it moves us farther away from finding a real solution to the problem. All we have to do is just look at over the last few weeks since the threats were made and to just listen to all the different conversations and discussions happening. None of them have actually come out with real solutions from the side of the Nigerian government or from civil society or the international community. Everyone is all focused on what has been said. So it moves us farther from finding solutions, and especially in environments like those in the middle belt where we've seen protracted conflicts. Time and time again, as you engage in these communities, you realize that while people live together, there are very low levels of trust, and it's extremely important that we keep that in mind because very little things can inflame tensions that already exist in the country.
Thank you. You've talked a lot about this deficit of trust, lack of trust, about the sort of crisis of governance in Nigeria. How should Nigeria fix this problem, and how should the United States work with Nigeria to address it? Like, what would you advocate as the type of diplomatic actions and U.S. investments that would make sense here?
I think most importantly, for this situation, Nigeria needs to take the lead and literally summon the utmost political will in this regard. As I mentioned in my testimony, a lot of these narratives have continued because people, Nigerians are not getting the justice that they deserve. And unfortunately, it's breeding an environment where there's a sense of impunity, where those who carry out attacks, regardless of what religion they come from, they feel they can continue those attacks. And then the communities, there's a sense of grievance where at the end of the day, if they feel that the government isn't coming to their aid, they come up with their own narratives. So at the end of the day, there needs to be an acknowledgement on the part of the Nigerian government. Nigeria needs to take the lead. Nigerian leaders need to summon the political will and work with their allies and partners, such as the United States, to be able to address this violence. You know, at the end of the day, we may put out numbers there and talk about the numbers of victims, but it's important for us to put a face to these numbers. The violence has gone on for so long in Nigeria. So Nigeria needs to take the lead, work in partnership with allies such as the US, and there is a moment here, there is an opportunity here for folks to come to the table to really find a sustainable solution to this problem.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. And Ms. Shea, appreciate you highlighting the issue of the disarmament of Fulani militants. I think that certainly would be one of these solutions. Obviously, there's not a singular one. It's a multifaceted problem that's going on here in different regions of the country, and there's a lot of complexities to it. But as we've heard, I think, a couple times here, and I do agree with, there is an opportunity here for the Nigerian government to strengthen, deepen, and broaden their relationship with the United States if they will do that in coordination and cooperation with the United States government. When I met with the delegation, as Mr. Smith met with them as well, that was one of the messages that I gave to them, is that there is an opportunity here, but you're going to have to take that opportunity. And I am very hopeful that they will do that, because myself and Chairman Smith and President Trump, we've had enough of this. This cannot continue to go on in the manner that it has, and it now has the president's attention. And I do agree that, you know, you get all this kind of information flying around out here that many times is not helpful. I recently saw the foreign minister was in some interview, I think it was Piers Morgan, and it was the same thing when they came here and some of us spoke to them, just disputing these numbers, right? I think the foreign minister said in the last 5 years, there's only 177 Christians have been killed. I don't think there's anybody that believes that, right? And I don't think that it's necessarily constructive on their part to try to downplay what's happening here. But Michelle, I'd ask you, how do you think about the differences, though, in between some of these statistics that have been reported, obviously, of non-governmental organizations that it seems to me have robust on-the-ground informational networks, and those offered by the Nigerian government? How do we have such a huge disparity in the numbers in between what we're saying or what some of these groups on the ground are saying, and then the foreign minister saying there's 177 Christians killed in the entire country of Nigeria over the last 5 years, that which is just hard to believe. It seems that number was achieved likely in just the last couple months, but please.
Yes, you're right. It's huge disparity, and assuming it's not just propaganda, one of the reasons why there is a range of numbers for any particular event is that precisely because the government doesn't do any police work. So there's no one that comes in to prevent it or to, during its occurrence, to stop it, or in the immediate aftermath. So the witnesses have fled for their lives. There's chaos. There's destruction everywhere. The evidence has been tampered with or been deteriorated by the time people come along. It's very hard for the local pastors and priests, who are the ones there taking the body counts, helping the survivors. It's very difficult for them to do that job and at the same time do documentation. They do it as best as they can, but the numbers are far larger than that foreign minister is saying. I also want to say that I think that President Trump's designation of CPC has been extremely important. He has gotten the attention of the government of Nigeria. We've heard that there's a high-level delegation in Washington today discussing this with the United States.
I met with them yesterday.
Yeah, so I think that this has been a very beneficial exercise thus far. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And we've heard several people mention early warning systems, and I do agree with that. I think that those can be helpful. But I do want to highlight a case that just happened recently in the Plateau State. We had a pastor there who had warned the Nigerian government and said, we are under imminent threat. We're going to face an attack if you all don't send some forces here in the next 24 hours. We need help. Please come here and help us. The Nigerian government not only ignored it, They literally put out a press release about it, calling it fake news and hyperbole and being overblown. Well, 13 people lost their lives the next day. 13 people murdered. Christians murdered. I don't know how much an early warning system is going to work if people aren't listening to warnings that are literally over the phone. I'm not sure. So I'd say to the Nigerian government, you're going to have to, and we keep using the term, prioritize this because it's certainly a priority for President Trump. And I think many of us on this panel here today on this dais. But I just wanted to highlight that because that is the type of behavior that has to change, because, and to your point of people not trusting the government, how can you trust a government that doesn't even show up when you ask them to? How are you supposed to trust your life with something like that? You can't. Obviously, you can't. And I think that's why it's incumbent upon the Nigerian government to work with us in coordination and cooperation to address these issues. Obviously, there's going to be some type of bifurcated approach to this. The Fulani Islamic militant issue in the middle belt of the country is distinctly different from what you face with Boko Haram and ISIS in the northeast of the country, and that's probably more of a question of kinetic military options rather than some of the other things that maybe State Department could do more in the middle belt, backed up by some of those same type of, at least military deterrence options in that part of the country. But I think it does need to be a kind of whole of government approach to this, but we have to have the Nigerian government as a willing partner in all of this, because the president is, as Chairman Smith just said, extremely serious about this. I'm extremely serious about this. I stay up at night. It's hard to sleep sometimes thinking about this, and I pray about it every single night, just thinking about, my own brothers and sisters in Christ in that country just getting murdered for the profession of their faith, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So it is absolutely heartbreaking. But I do want to thank the chairman again for convening this hearing, as he has over the many years and working to advocate for people of Nigeria. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, and thank you for your leadership. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your leadership. To Mr. Nnamdi, what do you see as the primary drivers of religious freedom violations in Nigeria? And secondly, what are the political, economic, social, and historical factors that exacerbate the situation?
Thank you, Congressman. I really think it's a mix of factors here that we're looking at. A mix of factors here. And as I mentioned in my testimony, at the core of this are failures of governance. There needs to be an opportunity to address the governance deficits that we see across the board in Nigeria at every level. And I think sometimes when we look at this issue, it's also important because we haven't been able to take a look at it from a whole of government, from a holistic point of view. It's important for us to understand what are the areas that really encompass more institutional weaknesses, and then what are the areas that are plainly just a lack of political will. And so I think, again, as I had mentioned earlier in my earlier response, there is an opportunity here to actually begin to identify what are the areas, what are the institutional weaknesses that exist within the Nigerian system that allow or enable the environment for the violation of religious freedoms. And then what are the instances where it's just plain old lack of political will. Once we're able to do that, then you'll be able to identify a proper solution to a problem. Right now, we haven't been able to identify a proper solution. And this is why these conflicts are protracted and they've continued time and time again.
Well, thank you so much. It's also very peculiar. I'd like for it to be noted in the record as we look forward to the great works of the continent and Africa as it marches and rises towards 2050, where 25% of the world's population will be of African descent. and this country, the United States, seems to talk down to African people. Historically, I would say that the United States is a very generous nation, and in some ways the most generous nation, but has the most peculiar cruelty towards the African continent, and it must be confronted about its legacy. The second thing is we are right now in a hostile environment with the Republic of South Africa and Nigeria, the nation's two most populous countries, if you will, or certainly two most prosperous countries. This should be dealt with. I have another question for you. Based on your experience, which types of U.S. government programs or initiatives have been past or present, have been most effective in promoting religious freedom and interfaith dialogue in Nigeria?
Thank you very much for that question. And for several years, I actually worked specifically in the Middle Belt on these types of community security initiatives. And we've seen local level peace building initiatives where communities have been able to, and most importantly, as a community led by the communities, they've been able to put in place early warning systems, and beyond those early warning systems, moving a step further to ensure early response. Because, as has already been pointed out, it's of no use if people are able to raise an alarm and no response comes through. So over the years, we've seen some successful low-level peace-building programs across the Middle Belt, community-led peace-building programs. We've also seen programs that have included religious leaders from both faiths, particularly in places like Kaduna, in Adamawa, in Benue, in Plateau State. We've seen interfaith mediation councils where Muslims and Christian leaders have been able to come together to work closely with their communities. Those types of initiatives we've seen have been very successful.
Last question I would have for you. In its effort to dismantle the USAID program, the Trump administration terminated a USAID program called Partner that supported peace-building efforts to northern and north-central Nigeria. The $2 million project helped to strengthen the country's early warning and security response systems and provide training for local leaders, including religious leaders, on conflict mitigation strategies. This project, amongst others, it helped to provide local leaders with mechanisms to alert law enforcement to possible conflicts before it happens. Partner also helped facilitate communications between farmer and herder, community leaders, often individuals from different religious backgrounds, in an attempt to bridge the gap between the two groups. Ms. Arungbu, what are some of these early warning signs of conflict? How would you describe the drivers of conflict in northern and central Nigeria, and to what extent do you assess these stem from religious and climate and resource competition?
As I said, the mix of these drivers, it's a mix, and they're complex. And that's where I say, as you look at violence or as you look at a specific conflict, it's important to understand that there might be some conflicts, or there are conflicts that are specifically driven by religion. And there are some other conflicts that may have specific drivers. Where the challenge is now, or where the problem is when everything is lumped in together. You know, working for several years in the Middle Belt, when a conflict breaks out and people say, oh, it's a farmer-header conflict, it's a farmer-header conflict. Now, every type of conflict in the Middle Belt becomes a farmer-header conflict. But we need to take the time and take the step to actually identify which of these conflicts are driven specifically because of disputes between farmers and herders, and then which of these conflicts are just plain old criminality, as some of them are, and then which of those conflicts are actually driven because people might be targeted because of their faith. And I think this is where we miss the point when we do not acknowledge the complexities within Nigeria, when we use a single story to define the conflict This is why we've not been able to find viable solutions. If we go back, and I believe, Ms. Shen, in the previous panel, we spoke about the Chibok girls. This was an incident that happened in 2014, and just a week ago, we saw another group of school children kidnapped from their schools. Since 2014 till today, we've seen 6 different incidents of kidnapping. And we've had discussions on each and every one of them. But we've not been able to identify a viable solution because we tend to oversimplify and we tend to generalize what the problems are. But for every conflict that happens in Nigeria, there are specific drivers, and we have to be able to take the time to identify what the root cause is of each specific conflict for us to be able to develop a sustainable solution.
I thank you so much for your testimony. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jackson. Mr. Stutzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here. Consecutive administrations here in the United States have viewed Nigeria as an important partner in West Africa. But I would say that our relationship has been less than perfect. Just last year, the Nigerian government wrongly detained Tigran Gambarian, a U.S. citizen and former U.S. IRS agent, for 9 months on trumped-up charges of money laundering and tax evasion. Combining this with the Nigerian government's woefully inadequate response to this violence, I'm concerned that they may not have our best interest at heart. And I'd like both of you to answer this. And Ms. Shea, maybe you can go first, but would you elaborate on the relationship between Nigeria and the United States? And do you think continued inaction on religious freedom issues will harm our relationship going forward? Does Nigeria want to have a civilized relationship with countries in the West and in Europe and other parts of the world?
Oh, thank you for your question. I think that Nigeria wants and needs the United States. And I think that many Nigerians have come to this country and continue to come to this country for education, for investment reasons, or to live. And they are among our most successful, if not the most successful immigrant group. So I think that they have a lot to gain, and they know that from a relationship with the United States. I think I'm encouraged that the Nigerian government has an extremely high-level delegation over here talking to the Trump administration about how to improve relations.
So that the Nigerian people, for sure, is what it sounds like you're saying, want a relationship with the United States. What about the Nigerian government? I mean, to the extent that they're giving us lip service on Christians being killed, I mean, do they have the ability to put a stop to the killings?
I think they have an ability to take action, which they have not done in the Middle Belt, where the Christians are the primary target. They're the special target of these militias. And the government has not lifted a finger to help them until now, and maybe not even now. But I think that the government was not given any message before. I mean, we really, this is the first year that the first couple weeks that the government of the United States has said that there's a problem, that we are not happy. Our law, the International Religious Freedom Act, requires us to point them out and put them on the list of the world's worst persecutors of religious freedom, violators of religious freedom. So they have not gotten that message before. Before they were told that there were root causes, that these are two socioeconomic groups, there was no mention of religion. We were told, and the Chairman Smith was told by Secretary Blinken and others that this had nothing to do with religion. So now we have a new analysis, and I think that we've had a very hopeful response to that.
I mean, are we frenemies? Are we, what are we?
We're friends. And I'm sorry, I actually missed your original question. If you could repeat.
Yeah, I'm just asking, could you elaborate on the relationship between Nigeria and the United States? And do you think that continued inaction on religious freedom issues will harm our relationship going forward? Does Nigeria, are they hearing the messages that are coming from our president, from the United States, about the concern of genocide? And not just, I realize there's people that are being killed that are both, Christian and non-Christian, but that this sort of violence is just cannot be tolerated.
Well, if they weren't hearing it before, they're definitely hearing it now. And I think, as I've mentioned before, there is an opportunity, and an opportunity that should not be missed in the way we convey as the U.S. how we want to work with Nigeria on this issue. The framing of the engagement really matters, and I think this is where we have to be, the U.S. has to be strategic in its partnership. The partnership with Nigeria, as you rightfully mentioned, is one of our most important partnerships on the continent. As was mentioned, by 2050, the population of Nigeria will surpass the population of the United States. So this is definitely a relationship that we have to keep and build, but approach our dialogues from a place of honesty. And I think what we have going now in this relationship is that the Nigerian people, there is a wide acknowledgement by the Nigerian people that something needs to be done, and done quickly, about the levels of insecurity in the country.
Do you think the Nigerian government is capable of putting a stop to the violence?
And then this is where I say that with the Nigerian government actually looking at where the inefficiencies lie or where the weaknesses are within its institutional capacity. And I think this is where, again, being able to differentiate what are institutional weaknesses and then what is just plain lack of political will.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be an admittance of where the areas of weakness lie. And there are some clear areas of weakness.
I agree. And I think they should, if they can't handle it, they should be willing to ask the international community for help. I mean, we should all be standing for life, no matter where at in the world. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you. As we close, I just want to make a point. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, in their report, says that Nigeria's government has continued to forcibly close camps hosting displaced Christians who fled violence by Boko Haram, despite persistent security concerns in their communities of origin. That is a deep concern, and we're appealing to the country, to the government, I should say, of Nigeria, to rectify that. I also would point out that, there's without objection, I would ask that ask unanimous consent that a op-ed that's in National Review by Maureen Ferguson and Asif Mahmood be included. The title is Nigerian Girls Are Being Kidnapped. Islamic terrorists have inflicted a decade of religiously motivated violence on Christian women and girls. I would note parenthetically that according to Amnesty International, April 2024, that over 1,700 children have been abducted since 2014, since the Chibok girls incident, 17 cases of mass abduction. But it's interesting that this piece that was written, this op-ed, and without objection, it'll be part of the record. Maureen Ferguson was appointed to the commission by Mike Johnson, the speaker. Asif Mahmood was appointed by Hakeem Jeffries. So there you have both sides of the aisle, both sides of the political, ideological spectrum, writing an op-ed about these girls and about this terrible sexual violence. So without objection, it is part of the record. And anything else that you'd like to say before we close? Thank you so much for your leadership, your comments today. I want to thank my colleagues, both sides of the aisle, for their very, very incisive questions. And we have much to do. The hearing is adjourned.
This is Channels Television. You've been watching our live coverage of the U.S. Congress public hearing on the designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern by U.S. President Donald Trump. Please stay tuned as we continue with our other programming for the day.
Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media.
Authentic Big Bull rice, 50 kg and 25 kg, now with holographic seal tape. This is to ensure you get the premium product from Big Bull rice. Do not buy if the holographic seal tape is not on the bag or is broken. Big Bull rice, tasty rice, nourished you.
Chromal, an effective weapon against malaria. Chromal on, malaria gone.
Thank you so much for staying with us this morning on the program. Let's talk about national security. And of course, Mr. Kabir Adamu has been about this for quite a while, and he's here again to share some perspectives. He's MD, CEO, Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. He joins us virtually. Thanks for joining us this morning, Mr. Adamu. It's another one. Unfortunately, every time these things happen, we hope we don't hear any more of it, but here we are. What are the issues that you think could be responsible for this resurgence?
Thank you, and good morning. The issues have not changed significantly. They are rooted in politics, both local and international, what we would describe as geopolitics. And then you have the economic factors. You also have the environmental factors, as well as the social factors. So depending on the type of threat element, which by the way I must say are spread, and for me that's really the most disturbing element. You have a multitude of threat factors that are almost moving at the same time. In the Northeast, you have the insurgency, the terrorism. In the North Central, you have the farmer-herder violence that has metastasized into an identity-based conflict, a violent criminality that is kind of taking its own direction. And then, of course, in the Southeast, you have also its own type of violent criminality. In the South-South, you have violent criminality as well, including cult violence. In the Southwest, the same thing. So the country is facing a multitude of security challenges driven by those factors that I've mentioned. It also appears, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, that Nigeria is under siege, both from local as well as international elements.
Just a second, Mr. Adamu, just 1 second. Jeffrey said at the beginning of the show that we are lying to ourselves, and we need to look ourselves in the eye and tell ourselves brutal truths, he said. Now, when you say that these issues of insecurity are rooted in politics, that is, or rather, that sounds a bit disturbing. And I think if Jeffrey's word is to be brought into that, is it that the politicians are papering over cracks, or just as we said, deceiving themselves? Also remember that a top military official in Nigeria, in the very recently, said that the military, the security agencies will do what the security agencies should do, but the politicians should do what the politicians should do. Otherwise, if they're both not singing from the same hymn sheet, then we are not going to be dealing with the issue. So are we deceiving ourselves when we know, if we know, that the issues are rooted in politics and we seem to be looking for other reasons?
Yes, I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. we are in a state of lack of actually reality. We do not realize that this issue, if we do not address it, it's going to swallow us up. As it were, under the social contract, we have handed over the responsibility of dealing with the problem to our political class. But sadly, for some odd reasons, our political class are not handling the matter with the appropriate attention that it deserves. Yesterday, one of the most senior aides to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu released a statement purportedly on behalf of the president. And if you take time to look at that statement, there were two aspects of that statement that bothered me as a security practitioner. In that statement, the president mentioned that there was intelligence before the attack in Kebbi and that the attack still occurred. The president also admitted to being depressed. Now, maybe it's a misuse of words, or maybe it's the reality, as it were, that the president is actually depressed. And maybe, yes, there was intelligence. But how can we have a president that is depressed in the manner, and then yet he's, we're going on in the manner that we're going? How come no person has been held accountable for the series of lapses in our security, national security occurrences? How come, for instance, after the incident in Kebbi, if the president is admitting in writing that there was intelligence, how come nobody was held accountable? And if the executive arm is failing to act, how come all we're hearing from the number 3 citizen in the country, which is the president and the chairman of the National Assembly, is that there is crime in every part of the world? And yet they are not using the legislative instruments at their disposal to put pressure on the executive arm of government. And that pressure can range from a motion up to an attempt to impeach the president. Those are instruments that are available to them, but yet we are not seeing them exercise those instruments. So yes, the political class is playing with this matter, and if we do not wake up to address it, I'm sorry to say it's going to swallow us.
For a tasty meal, choose Gold.
Terra Gold. 1 cube, endless possibilities.
I'm happy you said it as it should be said, because it's just difficult, because I've interviewed you so many times. A lot of us have interviewed you and your colleagues who are in the intelligence community, and one of the things we heard from all of you is the fact that these people are not in the sky. They know where these terrorists are. You guys know, the government knows. Of course, there's the element of geopolitics and the intricacies of, the dynamics that can be quite complex. But the basics are the basics. I think for the people that are being killed, especially the Christian community that is saying this is persecution, this is genocide, wherever that help comes from is inconsequential to them. Whether it's a mischaracterization on their own, but that is their reality, we can't dismiss it. But where I'm going to with that question now is, if it seems like, because we're not sure of the broader intention of the West, and based on trend, we're worried about whatever it is they are coming to do in terms of intervention. So what exactly is going to happen in terms of action beyond the lobbying that we're seeing? Action, because while they are in the UF, I think today the subcommittee is going to sit and then submit proposals to the White House on this genocide issue. Besides the lobbying, because while all of that is going on, a general has been killed, the girls have been kidnapped, another attack has happened. It looks like nothing is happening, although we know something is happening, but it appears it's not enough at all. What is the West or anybody who is an onlooker expecting from us in terms of action? I also read somewhere that one ISWAP leader also, I think I heard it on The Nation, has been sentenced to 20 years. I was like, an ideological terrorist sentence to 20 years, are we joking? So what do you think has to happen?
In simple terms, a roadmap that identifies in very clear terms how this security challenge is going to be addressed. Anything short of that will not be acceptable to the United States of America. And for me, the litmus test of the efficacy of the visit by the federal government delegation is whether they would be allowed to, into the hearing that the Congress is holding today on Resolution 860. If they are not allowed into the hearing, then honestly, it's a waste of government resources, taxpayers' money that they're in the U.S. Because, I mean, what's the point of going if they cannot even attend a congressional hearing on the same issue that has taken them there? So we wait to see. Luckily, the U.S. is behind us in time, and so probably in the next few hours, we'll be able to see whether that delegation will be allowed into the Congress to now give their own version and their own perspective. Sadly, I'm not expecting much, Jeffrey, in the sense that, number one, our National Security Council has not held. After that threat by President Trump, the most powerful military country in the world threatened us that they are going to attack us, and yet we've not had our National Security Council seat. Now, I'm sure probably the listener will say Nigeria is a small country, there's nothing we can do if the US decide to attack us. But no, that cannot be. We're a sovereign country. We've got enough muscle, both diplomatically and then in terms of numbers. That council is the highest security council that we have. It should have sat. It should, at that meeting, the president and his aides, especially the cabinet ministers, should have presented to the council that the roadmap to say this is the security challenge that we have and this is what we are going to do to solve that security challenge. In my organization, Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited, we know that in the first 10 months of this year, 9,000 people have been killed, about 9,400. That roadmap should be able to show clearly that in the next 2-3 months, those numbers are going to be reduced. At the moment, we're having an average of about 600 to 700 people killed every month. That roadmap should show how that number should be reduced and eventually completely eliminated. I know that's utopian to think that killings will stop in the country. It's utopian, so I'm not even going there. We can reduce it to an acceptable minimum. I mean, I know most people will not want to hear this, but that's the reality. I'm not in that utopian realism where I would say we'll eliminate it. But that roadmap should be able to show a reduction that is acceptable. That acceptable reduction should be in the realm of about 100 or thereabout. Now, anything short of this, we're just kidding around. And sadly, like I said, the National Security Council has not met. The relevant players, the members of that National Security Council, we've not had their voices, Jeffrey. The voices we're hearing is the Minister of Information and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And unfortunately, the voices are not echoing the kind of messaging that we would like to hear. We know what the challenges are. Like you rightly said, we know the basis where these bad guys are. We know the non-state actors. We know who is driving them. We have enough agencies in this country. Anyone who is kidding himself, we have up to 42 agencies, ministries, departments, and agencies in government to address this challenge. Now, that roadmap should present a mind map of that 42, showing clearly where we are, and then the destination to take us to a point that is acceptable to us as Nigerians. And let's not forget that we're under the, as it were, the searchlight of the world. The biggest military power in the world has cast a searchlight on us. Now, irrespective of the objective of that searchlight, what we need to do as a country is to make sure we channel our resources to a point where we're able to manage the security challenge. Unfortunately, those ingredients for managing the security challenge are not being harnessed in the manner that it should. Like I said, the National Security Council, our intelligence community, name them. Yes, there is a committee that has been set up by the federal government. A delegation of that committee is in the US, but those are not the constitutional platforms that have been provided for managing national security issues.
Well, you know, I want to ask you a double-barreled question. One of them based on the issues that you have raised, and the other one of the people in government, at the top level of government, who are also speaking. From what you said, how much of what we're talking about concerning this insecurity is politics, and how much of it is really insecurity issues? How much is politics? If there is anything about it that needs to be addressed politically, either by the president or the governors or the various localities, it'll be good to hear you say it. The second thing is second question that I'd like to ask you is the statement credited to the secretary to the government of the Federation, where he says recent pronouncements from the United States have inadvertently emboldened opportunistic violent groups seeking to exploit international narratives and make bold statements by attacking soft targets. Do you agree?
Cook to impress.
The first part of the question, how much is politics? Politics is a driver as well as also an enabler. Politicians have weaponized insecurity to achieve political objectives. There is enough facts to support this. On the other hand, politicians are also responsible for addressing the national security challenge. They are the ones who appoint the individuals. As an example, the president will appoint most of the individuals that are heading the about 42 agencies that are involved in national security, the ministers, the heads of the MDAs, and the others. And then, of course, the National Assembly would most likely confirm those appointments. And then, beyond that, the measurement of their performance is also handled by politicians, political appointees, most times. So, invariably, the responsibility for either holding them accountable or for even managing them lies with the politicians. And at the moment, what we are seeing is, like I said, on the one hand, the politicians weaponizing violence, weaponizing insecurity to achieve political objectives. On the one hand, you have the ruling party trying to show progress. We've seen different statements coming out from various appointees saying that there has been progress or lack of it, when the reality, unfortunately, is the opposite. And then on the other hand, you have the opposition politicians, and sometimes even politicians within the ruling party who would want to show the absence of progress in order to achieve a political objective. There is also enough evidence, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, of instances where the same politicians trigger occurrences, security occurrences, in order to achieve a political objective. So again, they are enablers and they are also drivers. And like I said, they also have the responsibility for sanctioning and holding to accountable the officials. And where they fail to do that, which is where we are at the moment, lapses have occurred and the politicians are failing to hold the appointees accountable. If the president can admit in writing that there was intelligence before the incident in Kebbi, the logical thing to have done was to hold whoever was shared that intelligence with, and that person failed to act responsible. We haven't seen that yet. And the other side of it is we haven't seen the National Assembly also acting in the manner to say, okay, executive, you've not done X, Y, Z. This is our own legislative instrument for holding you accountable. A failure from all sides. At the level of the governors, we're also seeing massive failures. And I say this because I've traveled through almost all the states. I've looked at the kind of structures that they have for managing security. And most of them, honestly, apart from probably Lagos State, there is none that I would say has what can pass as a effective public security system in place. Most times what they do is to give money to the federal security agencies, sometimes buy vehicles, appoint individuals as either commissioners or special advisors on security, and it stops there. That marriage between personnel, technology, and systems, where we're not seeing it at the state level, in spite of the huge money that they've been getting for security over the years. So that's one part of the question. Kindly remind me of the second question.
The statements of the SGF about the pronouncements of the U.S. government emboldening violent groups to take undue advantage.
Yes, which is really unfortunate. It also speaks to this lack of synergy in government officials. We have sent a delegation to the U.S. to go and sit with the United States, and then on the one hand, you have a very senior ranking official now saying that the U.S. is responsible for triggering security occurrences. Now, that may be true. Opportunistic, criminals, groups may have taken advantage of that to, show, or perhaps even is being instigated to support the narrative. That does not matter. What is important is a sort of synergy of efforts. If we are engaging with the partner, should we also at the same time be accusing that partner of inciting violence? What would that mean in terms of how the partner would respond to us? Because let's not forget, the United States is an ally in Nigeria. Our diplomatic relations at the moment is extremely solid, even though, yes, there is that spat. But they have representation here. We have representation in the U.S. At various levels. There is a binational commission that sits. There is a defense partnership, and so many components. So again, I am not sure why the SGF will make that pronouncement. It may be true. It's not in my place to judge that. What we have seen, and for me, that's the most unfortunate development, is this division between the two major religions. You saw Kanu over the weekend in Jos issuing a statement and categorically confirming, as it were, that there is Christian genocide. Before then, we've seen the Supreme Council of Islamic Affairs issuing a statement that there is no Christian genocide. And that, for me, is the greatest danger that we're faced with at this moment. Social cohesion, social integration is gradually degenerating. And what are we doing as a country to close that gap, bring the two sides together? Yes, the president has met with the leadership of the two religions, but we haven't seen any action in terms of the two of them coming together and issuing a statement. NIREC is there. I'm not sure what NIREC is doing. I'm hoping that NIREC would act in a manner to bring the two sides together, because if we are not united, again, I want to say this, I've said it before, this thing can envelope us. We're playing with it in kid close, but believe me, it's big enough to envelope us.
We pray it never gets there, but as you said, action has to stop it, not just words. There's another bit I want you to speak to, which are the men on the ground. Why we say they're not doing enough, but the morale of these men who are at the front lines every day, and sometimes we see videos and filters of them being killed, or some of them in their struggle. Some of them have not seen their families for months and maybe years, and all of this. I want you to speak to that bit, because it looks like the men in the office, I don't know, maybe they don't understand, or they may understand, they had their own time of those processes. What can we do collectively to help boost the morale of our soldiers who are constantly at the front lines to ensure this doesn't swallow us? That's on one hand. The other hand, the president made an appeal that community support is required. But are you seeing enough from government for any community to collaborate with government in the first place?
Yes, so the first question regarding morale. The amazing thing, Jeffrey, is that the Renewed Hope agenda actually has that element. One of the imperatives contained in that agenda, which is a mandate now. The president has our mandate, so it's no longer, as it were, and it's left for him to, to implement it. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that implementation in the manner that it should be. And it's not, he has given the directives, the various agencies, ministries that have responsibility for doing that should have been the one. And again, remember what I said earlier on, it's the responsibility of the politicians to hold these individuals accountable. Unfortunately, for some other reasons, we're not seeing that. But the policy should have been developed. A lot is being done. If you look at the various security agencies, the police is doing a lot in terms of the welfare of its personnel, their housing, name them, they are being attended to. The military is all doing that. But that holistic approach, rotation that you identified, rotation of personnel, is significant. You cannot keep personnel in a theater of war for sometimes 4 years, 5 years. It affects their mindset. The killing of the general, Brigadier General Uba, in Borno Oyo State, that's something that would hugely affect their morale. What are we doing as a country to ensure that these things are managed in a manner that reduces the effect on those personnel? Unfortunately, we're not doing enough. We need to do more. And again, I want to say this is a responsibility for both the executive arm as well as the National Assembly. They are the ones who are they pass the budget, they make sure that through their oversight functions, that actions and activities are being followed in the manner that they are contained in the budget. So these two arms must improve in terms of how they are holding accountable the various players within the security sector. At the moment, the morale of our troops is extremely low, and we cannot win a war with this very low morale of our troops. And this cuts across all the security agencies. With regards to the second part of your question, communities, how they need to come in. Consistently, one of the factors that emerges when one is reviewing reports from our security agencies is the lack of acceptance by our communities. And the simple reason why we're failing to have that acceptance is because the ethos of our security function does not show to our communities that they're there to protect them. If the communities feel that our security agencies are there to protect them, then they will support us the more. I was listening to a senator, actually on your station, being interviewed by one of your colleagues yesterday, and he told in very clear terms how he feels disappointed. He feels he has failed his community because the promise he made to them when he was campaigning is to provide security for them. Now bandits have gone. Our